So moving forward, as you can see, there's just a lot of information that we want to, okay, so go from 12 down to 1, the days of Christmas. Well, that's what you guys did. It was one at a time. Doesn't it list them all, 12 down to 1?
Yeah, we took pictures of them.
Oh, okay.
And guess what they
Okay. All right, so one mystery solved, 12 days of Christmas. Okay, so on 490 and 491, okay? So when you look at letter A on page 491, okay, that's just one of the steroid hormones we talked about. What are 3 others? Three other steroid hormones besides cortisol. Estrogen's one. Testosterone. And aldosterone. Okay? So, of those 4, who deals with growth factors? Nope. Because it's kind of a trick question because it has to be unique between men and women. Estrogen and testosterone, okay? So then how is water conserved with a steroid hormone? Okay? So when we think of that, okay? You can't find it by looking for water. It's something that follows. The water follows is what I'm trying to say. So then, sodium is a what? It's a mineral. So a mineral corticoid. We're just trying to put common names, common phrases with these functions of these hormones. Now, this, as you can see, is an updated format. Now, whether it probably doesn't make much sense to you now. And like I said, some time they got put into this. I think the rationale and the reasoning behind it is okay, but I don't know if it's going to be useful for yourself. We hope so. It's just asking general questions about these, and then here you have the functions of them and what type of bases they are, okay? So on page 491, okay, as you can see, steroid-based hormones, we already know. I would expect that you know what is the parent compound for those 4 steroid hormones. Cholesterol, okay? So then that's what makes those 4 hormones a steroid hormone, okay? So then what could be an example of a non-steroid hormone? Yeah, that's not on here. You're not wrong. That's one I never would have thought. Cholestokin is a non-steroid. Epinephrine, yep. All those that you see that would be listed underneath where we see non-steroids, because the top 4 here are reserved for just the steroid hormones. Okay, so the reason we're looking at page 491, some of these hormones are, I don't know if you want to call it complex, but when you look at letter B, that is a very long amino acid-based structure. Now, typically, we associate amino acids with just what substance? We know that amino acids are the basic building blocks for what? For proteins, okay? For the majority of the time when you are talking about amino acids, you're talking about proteins. But there are other factors in the body that will have an effect on, okay? And this is one of them, okay? So parathyroid hormone or PTH that has all of those amino acids, okay, stacked together. What does PTH do? First of all, you have to know what that stands for, and that will give you a clue. Okay? So one of the things, where is that calcium coming from? Exactly, because what happens is when you look at this, especially for the non-steroids, typically the idea behind this is if you have two hormones stacked on top of one another, typically they have opposite effects, okay? The reason we say that is not quite the lower left-hand corner, but pretty close, okay? It's what you would find in the pancreas. And what two hormones would that be? Insulin's one, and glucagon is the other. And notice that they're stacked on top of one another. The reason for that is what type of mechanism that we talked about. So you're right, but that doesn't explain what a negative feedback mechanism is, though. Yeah, because what happens is once the stimulus has occurred, the other hormone's going to try to bring it back to a homeostatic level. Okay, that's why you vision that as a teeter-totter like this. Once it becomes in balance, you want to go back to a homeostatic level. Okay, so looking at this chart, what is another example of a negative feedback mechanism? And we have mentioned them before. Okay, that's the first one. Okay, you said cholestockinin, and what's the other one, though? Nope. Because, okay, when we talk about cholestockinin, that's in the stomach. But what does that cholestockinin do? Has something to do with acid. Not amino acids. Hydrochloric acid. Does it produce it or shut it off? The parietal cells produces it, but it has to get a signal to either turn on or turn off. So the cholestockinin, does that turn it on or turn it off? Turns it off. So then what essentially would turn it on then? Gastrin. Okay. So if we just limit it to just this page for now, what's another set of hormones besides the glucocorticoids that are non-steroids, insulin, glucagon? What might be, someone said epinephrine, okay? And notice you have epinephrine and norepinephrine stacked on top of one another, okay? So how are those hormones made, okay? What I mean by made, what is their composition? Because we know that aldosterone, okay, those are cholesterol-based. That's what we mean. That's what they're composed of. But what is epinephrine and norepinephrine composed of? Polypeptides with what on the end? An amine group, okay? So you two are the only ones that can answer that. What does an amine group mean to you? It's not very kind? No, of course not. What is an amine group? NH2. Because that's how you name amino acids, because it has nitrogen with two hydrogens. That's an amino group. That's something the rest of you juniors will become more familiar with in the general chemistry class when we talk about how many amino acids do you have to do? 3, I think? Oh, we did 5. Okay. Because when we get to it in the spring, you're responsible for 13. Okay. So that's why we take that in a progressive fashion. Okay. So when you look at letter C on page 490, okay, all those are amino acids. So when we start talking about amino acids, if you could go all the way back to this, just think if one of those amino acids, we'll just say lysine, okay? I just looked at the first one that I would see that maybe on the DNA it's AAG, okay? The complementary base pairings, of course, would be thymine, thymine, and cytosine. The messenger RNA, oh gosh, going back 1 and 2 years. Okay, this is the DNA strand. What's the messenger RNA down here? You remember? That's G. Nope. If this was an adenine, then yes. They actually have, the U does replace the thymine, but that's only on messenger RNA. Because how do these amino acids get to the ribosome? What physically picks them up? Not messenger RNA. Transfer RNA does that. So then what codes for this lysine, now you would say U, U, and C. This amino acid would physically be picked up by transfer RNA and brought to wherever it is it's going to be linked together. But if this is what the code is supposed to be, well, anywhere, somewhere on this DNA template, what happens if this is a mutation? It turns out to be another C. It's supposed to be lysine, but that throws the whole genetic code off. And sometimes it's just one amino acid that just does that for the whole protein, or it could even do it for this hormone. So when we talk about that in biology, it's really, really boring. It's until you apply it to perhaps a higher level of learning like this that maybe makes it more interesting and important. Okay, so letter C is, as you can see, again, amino acid based. What about letter D, oxytocin? It's got amino acids in it, but when you look at your chart here, the very lower left-hand corner, oxytocin is not an amino acid-based hormone. It's rather what? It's another polypeptide one. And the reason for that is for our purposes here. You know, it could be 2 or 3 years down the road and you say, you were wrong when we talked about that back in at Coleman-Egan. For our purposes, if the amino acid, linkages are shorter, and if they got 2 sulfur bonds in there, we refer to them as polypeptide based. Okay, that's the only difference why you categorize them different between polypeptides and amino acids. Okay, because it's got the types of hormones down on table 13.3 in the lower left-hand corner. Again, some of them are amine groups. That's your norepinephrine and epinephrine. Okay, so that's on this table. Okay, but for our purposes, we're going to say it's a polypeptide linkage, and it has amine groups on there, or NH2 groups. Okay, because peptide hormones and protein hormones, of course, they're both going to be composed of amino acids. Okay. We're just going to start at the beginning of the chapter and just keep right on talking about some of these hormone functions. Okay. All right. So next we want to turn to, 496 in some of these where it says control of hormonal secretions, okay? Because a lot of these, okay, I like to use, for instance, we talked about a cattle water, or you could even use a hog water. You don't have to be out there to fill that every day unless you don't have a water source. You just turn on the spigot, fill the cattle tank with water, and then have to do it the next day. But if you have a cattle water that has a little float in it, okay, when that float drops, what happens? Water flows in, and that float starts to do what? Raise back up, and then once it reaches a certain level, what does it do to the water coming in? Shuts it off. That's kind of similar on how your endocrine system works. Okay, so 13.4, control of hormonal secretions, okay? The body must be able to turn process on and off, turn processes on and off. For example, removal of acetylcholine from a neurotransmitter junction stops skeletal muscle contraction. In the case of hormones, a measurement called half-life indicates the rate of removal. Half-life is the time it takes a half of the hormone to be removed from the plasma. For example, a hormone with a half-life of 10 minutes would start out at 100% of its blood concentration. And if the secretion were to stop, it would drop to 50% in 10 minutes, 25% in another 10 minutes, 12.5% another 10 minutes, and so on. Hormones with short half-lives, a few minutes, control body functions that turn on and off quickly, whereas the effects of hormones with longer half-lives, such as thyroid hormone and steroids, may last for days. Hormones are continually excreted in the urine and broken down by enzymes, primarily in the liver. Okay? Therefore, increasing, decreasing blood levels of a hormone requires increased and decreased secretions. Hormone secretion is precisely regulated. So in short, what we're talking about is when your hormone levels drop, it's just like that float. It drops down, or that half-life. It starts to continually flow in, the float goes back up, and eventually shuts it off. Okay. Because one of you had asked a question, how are hormones removed? And whoever it was that asked it, you gave the right answer. And how did we know that? Was it a guess? Or did you read that?
No, I looked at my notes.
Okay, and maybe we talked about it in class.
Usually by the liver.
Okay, and that's where that comes from. It's something that we're just not making up. The liver produces so many enzymes that, and some of these enzymes will remove that from the body. Okay, so control sources. Control of hormone secretion is essential to maintaining the internal environment. In a few cases, primarily the reproductive systems. Positive feedback affects this control. Generally, hormone secretion is controlled in three ways, all of which employ negative feedbacks. In each case, an endocrine gland or the system controlling it senses the concentration of the hormone the gland secretes, process the hormone controls, and in action the hormone has an internal environment. Okay? The hypothalamus controls the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, can anyone name two common hormones that are not on the anterior side? That's a tough question. You have parathyroid hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone. Those are on the front side, but there's two that are not. Oxytocin's one, and ADH is the other. Prolactin, I believe, is another anterior pituitary source. Okay, so again, the hypothalamus controls the anterior pituitary gland's release of tropic hormones, which stimulate other endocrine glands to release hormones. The hypothalamus constantly receives information about the internal environment from neural connections and cerebrospinal fluid. This is possible because the hypothalamus is near the thalamus and the third ventricle. Okay? So that doesn't answer what tropic hormones are. Those are searching for targets. Okay? So if TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, is a tropic hormone, which it is, it's going to leave the anterior pituitary gland and it's going to make its way down to the thyroid gland. So, what does TSH do? Because what does TSH actually mean? Thyroid stimulating hormone. So it goes from the anterior pituitary down to the thyroid gland and causes that to be stimulated to release what from the thyroid gland? Also starts with a T. Thyroxine. That's right. Okay? I think that's enough for today. We will continue with this hormonal actions and functions tomorrow. Just go ahead and grab a book when you sit down, because we're going to start to get into these specific hormones again. And like I said, go ahead and feel free. We'll refer to this every day this week. All right, we'll catch up to you next time.